Okay, so picture this, right? You're finally about to take that dream trip, like maybe you're going to walk through those ancient ruins in Greece, or you're going to soak up the sun on some tropical beach in Bali. But hold on a sec, because before you can even think about packing your bags, there's this one thing that could be a real pain, and that's getting your visa.
Oh, yeah. It's like this official permission slip you need to get into another country. And let me tell you, it's not always a walk in the park.
Exactly. It's a whole process. And one of the trickiest parts is that a lot of times embassies want to see your whole travel plan, like your flights and hotel bookings, before they even tell you if you can even go.
Right. They want to make sure you're a legit traveler and you're not going to overstay your welcome. And that makes sense to a point, but
Yeah. But here's the thing, who wants to drop a ton of cash on flights and hotels when you don't even know if you're going to get that visa?
hmm,
I mean, just thinking about it makes me sweat a little bit.
seriously, it's a huge risk, especially these days with travel costs being what they are.
Exactly. But get this. What if there was a way to check those boxes for the embassy without having to actually book everything up front?
Ah, you're talking about dummy bookings, right?
Yeah, dummy bookings. Have you heard of these?
Absolutely. It's a strategy that's getting more and more popular, especially for people who are trying to get into places with really strict visa rules, like the Schengen area over in Europe.
Yeah, the Schengen area, it kind of sounds kind of like a secret society or something. But seriously, can you break it down for us? What exactly are these dummy bookings and how do they actually work?
So basically, a dummy booking makes it look like you've got a real travel plan, even though you haven't actually paid for anything.
So it's kind of like showing the embassy a placeholder itinerary just to prove you've got things figured out, but without actually having to commit financially, right?
Exactly. It's like a temporary travel plan, but it's got to look real, with flight reservations and hotel confirmations, the whole 9 yards.
Wow, that sounds almost too good to be true.
It's
Is there a catch? Like, what's the downside?
Well, you got to make sure these dummy bookings are super convincing because embassies are pretty good at spotting fakes.
Right. You don't want to get caught with a bogus booking. That would definitely not end well.
Nope, not at all. So it's really important to use a service that's known for making itineraries that look just like the real deal, like they could have come straight from the airline or hotel.
Okay, so you're saying we got to go with the pros, not some shady operation. Got it.
Yeah.
But how do you even find these reputable services? Do you have to, like, know a guy who knows a guy?
Nah, it's not that complicated. There are actually a few ways to do it. Some travel agencies and visa assistance services offer dummy bookings as part of their packages, so that's one option.
Oh, that's convenient, especially if you're already feeling kind of overwhelmed by the whole visa thing. But let's say you're more of a, do-it-yourself kind of traveler.
Mhm.
Are there ways to get these dummy bookings on your own?
Definitely, there are a bunch of online platforms that specialize in dummy bookings. A few of the popular ones are Visa Reservation, Schengen Visa Info, and flight booking for visa.com. These sites make it pretty easy to create a travel plan that looks legit and fits your trip.
So you just go to the website, plug in your info, pick your dates and destinations, and boom, you've got yourself a dummy booking just like that. It sounds surprisingly straightforward.
Yeah, it's usually pretty simple. You'll usually need to give them your personal info, passport details, your travel dates, and where you're going. Some sites might even have you pick specific flights or hotels just to make it extra convincing.
So it's kind of like planning a real trip, but without the stress of actually booking and paying for everything. I like it. But okay, let's say I've got my dummy booking. How long is it good for? I mean, it's not like it lasts forever, right?
You're right. They usually only last for about 2 weeks, which is usually enough time to submit your visa application and get a response. But you should always double check the rules of the specific embassy you're applying to, because some of them can be stricter about how long the dummy booking needs to be valid.
Right. It's always better to be safe than sorry, especially when it comes to visas. You don't want some little detail to mess up your whole trip. Speaking of real-life examples, I heard about this traveler, Sarah, who used dummy bookings to get her visa. Have you heard this story?
Yeah, Sarah's a freelance photographer from Toronto, and she was planning this awesome trip all across Europe, but she was super nervous about the visa part, especially because it could cost a lot to book everything in advance.
Yeah, I could see why she'd be hesitant. It's a new idea for a lot of people,
Hmm.
and it kind of feels weird to submit fake bookings for something as official as a visa application.
Yeah.
So what made her decide to go for it?
Well, she did some digging online and found flight booking for visa.com. And after seeing all the good reviews and learning how it works, she decided to take the plunge.
So she got these official-looking documents without actually booking anything. Did it work? Was she able to get her visa with these dummy bookings?
It totally worked. She sent her visa application with the dummy bookings, and a couple weeks later, she got her Schengen visa approved. She was so excited to finally be able to book her trip for real without having to worry about losing a bunch of money if the visa didn't come through.
That's amazing. It sounds like these dummy bookings can really be a game changer for travelers like Sarah.
They can definitely make things a lot easier, but you gotta remember they're not a guaranteed solution. You
Yeah.
still need to meet all the other requirements for the visa and have a real reason for traveling. The dummy bookings just help with that one specific part of the application.
So it's like a helpful tool, not a magic wand, got it. But they can make the whole process a lot less stressful and risky, especially for those big trips where you're going to multiple countries. I'm already thinking about all the places I could go with a little help from these dummy bookings. But let's break it down a bit. What are some of the main benefits of using this approach?
Well, I mean, the biggest one is probably saving money. With dummy bookings, you don't have to shell out for those pricey flights and hotels before you even know if you're going to get that visa, which can be a huge relief, especially if you're traveling on a budget or going on one of those epic trips that spans like multiple countries.
Yeah, for
Okay.
real. Just knowing that you're not going to lose a ton of cash if the visa doesn't come through,
Yeah.
that got to be a huge weight off your shoulders. But beyond the money stuff, are there other perks to using these dummy bookings?
Oh, yeah, for sure. They can really cut down on the stress and uncertainty that comes with applying for visas. Imagine having to book all your flights and hotels, knowing there's a chance you could lose it all if your visa gets denied. It's a gamble most people would rather avoid.
Seriously, I could totally see how that would be a nightmare, especially with everything else going on in life, like work deadlines and family stuff. It's like adding another layer of pressure to an already stressful situation.
Exactly. And that's where dummy bookings come in. They basically eliminate that financial risk so you can focus on getting all your paperwork in order and meeting the other requirements without that added worry.
So it's not just about saving money. It's about taking control of the process and making it a little less emotionally draining, which I think a lot of people can appreciate. But let's switch gears for a sec and address something that some listeners might be wondering about. Is using dummy bookings, well, is it ethical?
That's a really good question, and it's one that people have different opinions on. On one hand, you could argue that dummy bookings are just a tool to meet a requirement. You're not trying to trick the embassy or anything.
Right. It's like you're not lying. You're just showing proof of a potential itinerary, which is what they're asking for.
Exactly. But then again, some people might see it as a form of misrepresentation, like you're presenting something that's not entirely true, even if it's not technically against the rules.
I can see how that could make some people feel uneasy. It's kind of like a gray area. There's no clear-cut answer.
You're right. It really comes down to each person's judgment and comfort level. Some travelers are totally fine with using dummy bookings because it's a practical solution to a bureaucratic problem, while others might prefer to avoid them altogether, even if it means taking on more financial risk.
So it's about weighing the pros and cons and making a choice that aligns with your own values. But regardless of where you stand on the ethics, I think we can all agree that it's a topic worth discussing. It's important for people to know about this option and understand what it entails.
Totally agree. Knowledge is power, especially when you're dealing with the complexities of international travel. And sometimes having a few extra tricks up your sleeve can make a world of difference.
Speaking of tricks, are there any tips or strategies for making sure your dummy bookings are super convincing and actually work? Like, what should travelers keep in mind when they're choosing a service or putting together their itineraries?
That's a great question. And as I mentioned before, using a reputable service is crucial. Look for providers with tons of positive reviews and a proven track record of creating itineraries that look legit. You also want to make sure the dummy bookings match up with actual travel options.
So, no booking a flight that doesn't exist or reserving a room at a hotel that's been closed down for years. That would probably raise some red flags at the embassy.
Yeah, definitely avoid that. The key is to create a believable travel plan that wouldn't immediately set off any alarms. And don't forget the details.
Details, like what kind of details?
Things like booking confirmation numbers, contact info for the airlines or hotels, even realistic flight times and durations. Those little things can really make a difference in making your dummy bookings look authentic.
It's like they say, the devil's in the details, but in this case, it's more like the success of your visa application is in the details.
Exactly. A little extra attention to detail can go a long way.
And of course, we can't forget about making sure the dummy bookings meet the specific requirements of the embassy you're applying to, because each country might have different rules and preferences.
Oh, absolutely. It's always a good idea to double check the embassy website or give them a call to confirm what they need when it comes to travel itineraries. You don't want to go through all the trouble of creating this awesome dummy booking only to have it rejected because it doesn't fit their specific guidelines.
Oh man, that would be such a bummer. It'd be like studying for the wrong test, so thorough research and preparation are key.
You got it. It's all about being proactive and informed.
Okay, cool. So we've talked about the benefits, the ethical stuff, and the importance of choosing the right service and paying attention to detail. But now I'm curious, are there any situations where dummy bookings might not be the best way to go?
That's a really thoughtful question, and it's true that dummy bookings aren't the perfect solution for everyone. In some cases, it might actually be better to book your flights and hotels for real, even if there's a chance your visa could get denied.
Really? When would that be the case?
For instance, if you're traveling during peak season or going to a super popular destination, you might need to book your flights and hotels early to make sure you can even get a spot. If you wait until you get your visa, you might miss out on your preferred dates or end up at a hotel you don't really like.
Right, especially if you have your heart set on a specific hotel or resort. And I imagine prices can get crazy during peak season, so booking early might actually save you some cash in the long run.
Exactly. And sometimes having those real bookings can even make your visa application stronger. It shows the embassy that you're serious about your trip and not just testing the waters.
So it's like sending a signal that you're committed and not just messing around, which could work in your favor.
Exactly. It shows you're willing to put your money where your mouth is. But of course, there's always that risk of losing money if the visa doesn't come through.
It's a trade-off. You're basically weighing the benefits of potentially getting better travel options and a stronger application against the possibility of losing some money.
Exactly. And in the end, the best approach depends on your specific situation, your risk tolerance, and the rules of the country you're going to.
It's like choosing between two different paths, each with its own pros and cons.
I like that analogy, and sometimes the best way to make a tough decision is to gather as much info as you can, weigh your options, and then choose the path that feels right for you.
So it's about being informed, prepared, and making smart choices that work for you. But even with all this knowledge, some listeners might still be feeling a bit overwhelmed by the whole visa thing. It can be a daunting task, especially if it's your first time traveling internationally.
Oh, absolutely. The visa process can feel like a bureaucratic maze filled with paperwork, deadlines, and rules that seem to change all the time. It's enough to make anyone want to stay home and explore their own backyard, but don't let the complexity scare you away from your travel dreams.
I love that don't let the paperwork steal your wanderlust. But how do you keep from getting lost in that visa maze? What are some general tips for navigating the process without losing your mind?
Well, the most important thing is to start early. Don't wait until the last minute to get started on your visa application. Give yourself plenty of time to do your research, gather your documents, and fill out all the forms.
Because nothing adds more stress to travel planning than a looming deadline and a mountain of paperwork.
You got it. And remember, the time it takes to process a visa can vary a lot depending on the country and the time of year. So factor that into your planning and give yourself a buffer just in case.
Better to be over-prepared than scrambling at the last minute. Yeah.
Absolutely. And once you know what you need for your specific destination, take a good look at the application forms and instructions. Pay attention to every detail, like the format of your documents, the size of your photos, even the type of pen you use to sign the forms.
It sounds kind of tedious, but I can see how those little things could make a big difference whether your application gets approved or not.
They totally can. Embassies are looking for completeness, accuracy, and attention to detail. Even a small mistake could lead to delays or even a rejection.
So it's all about dotting your I's and crossing your T's. Got it. But what about supporting documents? What are some of the essential things travelers need to have ready when they apply for a visa?
Of course, the specific requirements will depend on where you're going, but some of the usual suspects include your passport, which has to be valid for at least 6 months after your trip, recent passport-sized photos that meet the embassy's standards, proof of your travel plans, like your flight itinerary and hotel bookings, and proof that you have enough money to cover your expenses during your trip.
So basically, you need to convince the embassy that you're a legit traveler with a solid plan, the money to support yourself, and no intention of overstaying your welcome.
Exactly. It's all about showing them that you're responsible and trustworthy.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from the excitement of planning a trip to the often dreaded visa application process. We've talked about the good and bad of dummy bookings, explored the ethical side of things, and even delved into some general tips for navigating the visa maze. But before we wrap things up, I want to go back to something we touched on earlier, the importance of being informed and prepared.
That's absolutely crucial for successful travel planning, especially when it comes to visas. The more you know about the process, the requirements, and the potential challenges, the better equipped you'll be to handle them with confidence.
Right, because in this case, knowledge really is power. But where can travelers go to find reliable and up-to-date info about visa requirements? Is it just a matter of digging through embassy websites and hoping for the best?
Embassy websites are definitely a good place to start. They usually have sections dedicated to visa info, like the types of visas available, the required documents, and how to apply. But sometimes those websites can be a bit dense and hard to navigate, especially if you're not familiar with all the jargon.
Oh, tell me about it. I've spent hours trying to figure out the fine print on those embassy websites. It's like you need a law degree just to understand what they're asking for.
Yeah, I hear you. And that's why it's helpful to get info from other trustworthy sources as well.
Like what? Are there any websites or resources you'd recommend?
For sure, there are some awesome online resources that provide comprehensive and easy to understand visa info. Websites like Visa HQ, iVisa, and Sherpa can be super helpful in figuring out the visa requirements for your destination, estimating processing times, and even helping you through the application process.
So they're like virtual travel assistants that can simplify things and take some of the guesswork out of it. I love that.
Exactly. And these websites often have helpful tools and features like visa eligibility checkers and step-by-step application guides. They can save you a ton of time and hassle.
That's a huge bonus, especially for people who are busy and don't have a ton of time to spend on visa research.
Definitely. And another great resource is your travel agent. If you're working with one, they can be a goldmine of knowledge and guidance. They're usually familiar with the visa requirements for different destinations and can make sure you've got all the necessary documents and info.
So it's like having a personal visa expert on your team.
Exactly. And even if you're not working with a travel agent, don't be afraid to reach out to the embassy or consulate of your destination country directly if you have any specific questions or concerns.
That's a good point. Sometimes going straight to the source is the best way to get the info you need.
Absolutely. The embassy staff are usually pretty knowledgeable and helpful, and they can give you the most up-to-date info and guidance.
All right, so we've given our listeners some valuable resources and tips for navigating this visa application process. But even with all this preparation, there's always a chance that something could go wrong. What happens if your visa application gets denied? Is that the end of the road for your travel plans?
Not necessarily. While getting a visa denial can be a huge bummer, it's important to remember that it's not always the final word. In a lot of cases, you can appeal the decision or reapply with more documentation or a stronger case.
Okay, so there's hope. It's like getting a second chance to plead your case.
Exactly. And sometimes the reason for the denial might be something easy to fix, like a missing document, a mistake on the application form, or maybe your travel plans weren't clear enough.
So it's important to really read that denial letter and understand why they said no.
Absolutely. The denial letter will usually explain why they made the decision and tell you how to appeal or reapply.
So it's like a roadmap for what to do next. But let's say you've tried everything and your visa application is still denied. Is there anything else you can do?
Well, at that point, it might be time to think about changing your travel plans. Maybe there's another destination that doesn't require a visa or has an easier application process.
That's a good point. Sometimes having to switch things up can lead to some amazing, unexpected adventures.
Exactly. And remember, there are so many incredible places to see in the world. You don't have to limit yourself to places that make it super hard to get a visa.
So it's all about being flexible, adaptable, and open to new possibilities.
Precisely. And who knows? That alternative destination might end up being even better than your original choice.
That's the spirit. Turn those travel lemons into lemonade.
Exactly. And remember, even if your visa gets denied, it's not the end of the world. There are always other options, other places to go, and other adventures waiting to happen.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've dug into the details of visa applications, talked about the pros and cons of dummy bookings, and even discussed what to do if your visa application gets rejected. I think our listeners are now loaded with info and ready to tackle their next international adventure with confidence.
I hope so. And remember, even though the visa process can be complicated and stressful, it's just one small step on the journey to exploring the world and experiencing all the amazing things it has to offer.
That's a great reminder to keep things in perspective.
And one last thought I want to leave our listeners with. No matter where you're traveling or what obstacles you face along the way, remember to enjoy the journey, savor the experiences, and never lose that sense of adventure.
Beautifully said. Before we wrap up today's deep dive, I really want to circle back to something we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
the ethics of using these dummy bookings. It's such a tricky subject. I'm really curious to get your take on it.
Yeah, it's definitely something worth thinking about carefully. Like we said, dummy bookings kind of fall into this gray area where they're not exactly illegal, but they do involve presenting something that's not 100% true. And that brings up all sorts of questions about honesty and transparency.
Right? Like, you're not outright lying, but you are creating this illusion of having confirmed travel plans, which could be seen as a form of deception. And I imagine that could backfire pretty badly if the embassy finds out.
Absolutely. There's always that risk with dummy bookings, and travelers need to be aware of that before they decide to use them. Embassies are getting better and better at spotting fake documents, and if they even suspect your itinerary isn't real, it could completely ruin your chances of getting that visa.
That's a scary thought. And besides the legal risks, there's also the ethical dilemma of whether it's right to manipulate the system, even if it's technically allowed. It comes down to your own values and what you're comfortable with.
Exactly, and I think it's important for travelers to be honest with themselves about why they're using dummy bookings. Are they doing it because they absolutely can't afford to book flights and hotels up front? Or are they doing it because it's just easier than going through all the hassle of making real bookings?
Those are some good questions to ask yourself because at the end of the day, the decision of whether or not to use dummy bookings is a personal one. There's no universal right or wrong answer, but there are definitely ethical considerations to weigh.
And I think it's also worth looking at the ethics of dummy bookings from a bigger picture perspective, like the power dynamics between individuals and institutions. You have travelers on one side who are just trying to navigate this complex and often frustrating bureaucratic system. They're trying to meet all the requirements, get their visas approved, and make their travel dreams happen.
It's like they're playing a game where the rules seem designed to make things as difficult as possible.
Yeah, kinda. And then you have the embassies and governments on the other side. They're responsible for protecting their borders, ensuring national security, and controlling who gets into their countries. So they have to carefully check visa applications and make sure only legitimate travelers are allowed in.
So it's this balancing act between individual freedom and national security.
Exactly. And dummy bookings kind of fall right in the middle of that tension. They're a tool that some travelers use to try and even the odds, but they also bring up questions about fairness, transparency, and whether the system is being abused.
It's a complicated issue with no easy solutions, but I think by talking about it and looking at it from different angles, we can become more aware travelers and make more thoughtful choices about how we approach international travel.
I totally agree. And in the end, I think the most important thing to remember is that travel is a privilege, not a right. And with that privilege comes a responsibility to respect the rules, be mindful of our impact, and engage with the world in a way that's both ethical and meaningful.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the world of visas and dummy bookings. We've covered a lot of ground today, tackled some tough ethical questions, and hopefully given our listeners the knowledge and tools they need to navigate the visa process with confidence.
It's been great exploring this topic with you.
Thanks for sharing your insights, and to our listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this complex and ever-changing issue. Share your experiences, your opinions, and any questions you have in the comments below.
We're always excited to hear from our audience and keep the conversation going.
So until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those travel dreams alive.